Okay, so I think we'll get started now. We've got several folks that have joined us tonight. We're a couple minutes after 5. So welcome everyone to the virtual workshop for the SR1 widening project from Road A to Tybouts Corner. My name's Pat Martino, and I'm part of the DelDOT project team, and I'll serve as moderator for our meeting tonight. We're looking forward to sharing information and receiving your feedback on the SR1 project. And this is the second workshop for this project, the first being held in November of 2020. So we're at a point in the planning process where we've developed preliminary alternatives and evaluated those alternatives. And we're working and developing a recommended preferred alternative, which we'll show you tonight. During this public input period, we'll gather feedback and answer questions related to the project, and we'll begin to prepare our environmental documentation, which will be available for review in the spring of 2022. So again, we appreciate your attendance and participation in this virtual workshop, and thank you very much for coming. I do want to go over a few housekeeping items since we're in a Zoom meeting. The virtual workshop is being recorded. So this recording will be made available on DelDOT's SR1 Widening webpage, and you can view the recording in days after this meeting. By default, everyone is muted and without video. You'll be able to see the panelists as we speak, but we won't be able to see you on screen. You can use the Zoom menu bar to adjust your audio settings and use the chat and Q&A features, which I'll explain here in a moment. If you have any questions about the technology, you can click on the chat icon and enter your questions. We have a technical person that's available that will monitor the chat box and answer any technical questions that you might have throughout the workshop. After our presentation, we'll have a question and answer session. To ask a question to the project team at any time during this presentation, you can click on the Q&A icon, which is at the bottom of your screen, and enter your question. And then during the question and answer period, we'll answer your questions one by one. At that point in time, during the Q&A period, the chat function will no longer work. If you're not on Zoom and you joined by phone, or you'd like to make a comment or ask questions after this meeting, there are several ways you can contact DelDOT. First, you can go to the website at deldot.gov/projects. You can scroll to the SR1 corridor, SR1 widening, and there are many ways on the website that you can link to leave your comments with DelDOT. There's a survey that's online. You can also send an email to DelDOT at dotpublic@delaware.gov. And then if you'd like, you could send your comments or questions through the mail to DelDOT Community Relations, P.O. Box 778, Dover, Delaware, 19903. Okay, so that takes care of the housekeeping. We'll get started. And once again, thanks everyone for attending. Just a reminder that the workshop's being recorded and this will be available on the webpage. Our presentation is going to take about 45 minutes and will be followed again, like I mentioned, by a Q&A period. And we've allowed for about an hour or so, but we'll try and answer all the questions that come in tonight and those that we did receive prior to the workshop. So Kim, if you'll go to the next slide, I'd like to introduce our project team and panelists for tonight. First, we have Matt Vincent, who's the Chief of Project Development for DelDOT. We have Brianna Kovac, who's the SR1 Project Manager for DelDOT. Carrie Webb, who's our Design Manager for the project team. Aaron Ramsey, who's our Planning and Environmental Document Lead. Kevin Hughes, who's our Noise Analysis Lead. BJ Song, who's our Traffic Lead. And Jim Burnett, who's helping to facilitate questions as they come in. And again, I'm Pat Martino, moderating tonight's meeting. So now I'll give it over to Matt and to say a few words on behalf of DelDOT. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Pat. Yeah, good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Matt Vincent. I'm the Chief of Project Development North for DelDOT. I just want to take a minute to, on behalf of DelDOT, to welcome all of you to tonight's workshop and thank everybody for participating. This is a great tool for us to get feedback from the public and be able to refine and improve our process and our design. So we really appreciate the feedback that we get here tonight. Take a minute also to acknowledge the legislators. I didn't see any legislators, so I don't know if they're on or if any of their staff are on. But I know we've had a lot of coordination with Senators Walsh, Townsend, and Pinckney, as well as Representative Bentz, and a lot of other stakeholders through this process. So again, we appreciate all the feedback that we get. They do a wonderful job of coordinating with us and representing their constituents. So again, we appreciate that. So again, just welcome to the workshop. We hope that you find it informative, and we really appreciate everyone taking the time and giving their input. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to the project manager, Brianna Kovac, who's going to give a brief overview of the project.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. And if you don't mind progressing the slide. Thank you so much. So tonight we're going to go over a couple things, quite a few things actually. So we wanted to kind of, it's been a little while since we talked to you guys. So we wanted to go over again the overview and the study area, which we discussed last November, and the purpose and need of the project, and then go through the alternatives development process, some comparison of impacts, and ultimately our big thing that Pat had mentioned earlier was talking to you about the recommended preferred alternative, which is a modified alternative 3, and how we got to that point. And then kind of the second half of the presentation really focuses on the updates to the environmental studies aspects of the project. And specifically, I know there were a lot of questions last time about the noise analysis, and then some visual mitigation efforts that will be underway as well. And then finally wrapping it up with the schedule and next steps. And again, just reiterating again how you can comment on tonight's presentation. Next slide, please. So we had showed this to you guys last time in November, the overall study area. I think just to refresh some folks' memories, there was a previous effort in the same area on SR1, and there was actually a draft environmental document that had been underway back in the 2012-2014 timeframe. At that point in time, the study area had the widening from Road A, which is just south of the mall, to the Roth Bridge. There had been no resolution on the SR 273 interchange alternative at that point in time, nor the new town ramps, because of some of the adjacent landowner and community concerns. So because of that, there was no decision on the preferred alternative. And with that, there was no environmental document that had been completed. So between then and now, though, DelDOT did have 3 breakout projects for some of the interim improvements that you've seen between 40 and 273 in both the northbound and the southbound directions. We've had auxiliary lanes, as shown on our map to the right here. And then we've also had the SR 72 diverging diamond interchange. These were 3 projects that we could break out from the entire study that offered some independent utility that could help relieve the area of some of the issues in between then and now. So today where we are is the study area extends approximately 3.4 miles from Road A, again, the same northern limits at the SR7 interchange to just north of Tybouts, which is where US 13 and SR1 come together. And again, this study area does include the 273 interchange and the Newtown ramps. Next slide, please. So the purpose and the need of this project, why we're here, why we're doing this. So if you drive this road every day, you see we're here to address existing and future traffic congestion on SR1, again, between that Road A and Tybouts Corner interchange during AM and peak hours, especially. And then again, with the needs, accommodating those existing and future traffic, improving the travel times, especially by eliminating those SR1 bottlenecks. And a big one that we see today is at SR1 and 273. So we're really trying to improve the operations and safety at that interchange as well. Next slide, please. So I just want to start off too by mentioning that this map is rotated 90 degrees, and you'll see the map rotated in future slides as well. to the 90-degree rotation. So just to orient yourself, it fits a little bit better this way on the screen. So what this project includes versus what it doesn't include that maybe the previous study had included. So just to reiterate, and I probably sound a bit like a broken record, but we are including the widening of SR1 from Road A near that mall to just north of Tybouts Corner Interchange. It does also include the construction of the new Newtown Road ramps, and it also includes the reconstruction of the SR1 and SR273 interchange. What this project doesn't include at this time is the reconstruction at the Tybouts Corner interchange where 13 and SR1 come together. And that's actually going to be addressed as a separate project in the future. Our team is actively working on that one as well. But a public workshop for that will be held sometime in early 2022. So just stay tuned for more information on that. So I think with that being said, I think I'm going to turn it over to Carrie at this point, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about the design aspects of the project and give you a refresher on the alternatives.
All right, great. Thanks, Brianna. So again, as we mentioned, or as Brianna just mentioned, really three main components to meet the purpose and need for this project. A little bit bigger map. So we have SR1 widening, the new Newtown ramps, and the SR273 and 7 interchange reconstruction. And we're going to talk about all three here this evening. So SR1 is an existing 2 through-lane section from Tybouts Corner up to Road A in both directions with some of those auxiliary lanes which have been recently constructed. Next slide, please. And just showing a cross-section of the SR1 widening. So this is taken between the Newtown Road ramps and 273 looking towards the north. So in this slide, the existing pavement is shown in black, and the highlighted areas indicate the new pavement widening in each direction. So the widening will provide 3 through lanes in each direction with auxiliary lanes between the on and off ramps, as well as full shoulders. So please note that the widening would occur within the existing SR1 right-of-way. Next slide, please. So this is a blow-up, zoomed-in view of the Newtown ramps with the southbound SR1 off-ramp to the existing SR7 signal at Newtown Road, shown in green, and the SR7 to northbound SR1 on-ramp via a flyover bridge, shown in blue. So these Newtown ramps redistribute traffic from the SR273 interchange and help address the SR1 southbound queuing and weaving issues that you see today at 273. Next slide, please. So now we're going to take a little closer look at SR1 and 273 interchange, where the existing challenges include 3 closely spaced signalized intersections on SR273, and the heavy southbound SR1 to southbound SR7 dogleg movement. So to recap, we'll now quickly review the 4 build alternatives at this interchange that we presented at the virtual public meeting back in November of 2020. And then we will describe how the recommended preferred alternative has evolved since that meeting. Next slide. It's the dogleg movement. Okay, so again, these next 4 slides are going to, again, recap what was presented back in November of 2020. So this was alternative 1, so the tight diamond intersection, right? Interchange. The signals 1, 2, and 3 remain in their existing locations as they are today, and the ramps maintain a very similar footprint as they do today. The main change was the addition of a channelizing median to prevent that dogleg movement from SR1 southbound to SR7 southbound. Motorists wishing to access SR7 from SR1 southbound would need to utilize the Newtown Road ramp. And this restriction was common to alternatives 1, 2, and 3. And also wanted to note that all alternatives included a sidewalk connection on the south side or eastbound 273 from SR7 heading east to connect to the existing sidewalk network, an on the other side of the interchange at Wedgefield Drive, as well as bike lanes on SR 273 throughout the project limits. Next slide, please. So this was alternative 2, which featured a southeast loop ramp, and that's that quadrant there. Here, signal 2 remains in its existing location, and the ramps to and from southbound SR1 maintain a similar footprint. This does include the previously mentioned channelizing island along westbound 273. And here, access to and from northbound SR1 is modified to relocate signal 3 further east to provide greater intersection spacing and doubling the storage between signals 2 and 3. Next slide, please. This was alternative 3, a single point urban interchange, or SPUI. So this alternative combined the 2 existing ramp signals on either side of SR1 into a single signal to accommodate all ramp movements. This included the previously mentioned channelizing island along westbound 273. And this alternative maintained a similar ramp footprint as existing. Next slide, please. And the final alternative, alternative 4, that was presented back in November of 22, was the offset diamond interchange. So here, signal 3 remained in its existing location, and the ramps to and from northbound SR1 maintained a similar footprint to today. Here, the main change was relocating signal 2 from the southbound SR1 ramps at 273 to a new signal along SR7. This is the only alternative from November 2020 that maintained the southbound SR1 to southbound SR7 movement. This alternative also provided an additional on-ramp to southbound SR1, serving westbound 273 and southbound SR7. So this is where the alternative stood in November of 2020. And now Brianna is going to summarize the timeline of how the project has evolved since then.
Thank you, Carrie. So as Carrie mentioned back in November 2020, when we met with the public, we had presented these previous alternatives. And at that point in time, with the comments that we received and the feedback, it seemed as though the preferred alternative was alternative 4 due to the access to southbound 7 at the interchange. Because as Carrie just mentioned, alternatives 1 through 3 restricted that southbound SR1 to southbound SR7 movement. Since then, though, we had quite a few other meetings, as you can see here. And these are just kind of the big ones that we wanted to highlight. So we did meet with some folks from the crossings at Christiana who had some very specific questions and concerns, just factoring in the new town square shopping center traffic. And again, they had preferred the alternative 4 due to the travel choice. And then, so at that point in time, the team had thought, okay, this is the route we're going to go. And due to some of the other, the operational impacts, benefits of that alternative, as well as the impacts to the environmental resources and such, that was what the team had recommended as the recommended preferred alternative. So at that point in time, we went to our DELDOT management and presented that as the recommended preferred alternative. They advised, hey, we should really meet with the legislators just to brief them again, and then to meet with the Christiana Village because that obviously was going to be a little bit closer to the town of Christiana. So then we also had some other internal meetings. Our folks at DTC had mentioned that they would like to maintain that bus hub there on the corner of 273 and Route 1, as well as 50 parking spaces. We had met with our environmental study section internally and again presented alternative 4. And then met externally with our environmental agency partners, where we coordinate with the EPA, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the State Historic Preservation Office, and Federal Highways. Again, presenting alternative 4 as the recommended preferred alternative. And then when we went back to the legislators and presented that, again, what we had heard from them was, hey, we really want you to meet with the Christiana Village, which we had been planning on doing. And then one of the other big things that we had heard throughout the entire time between November and now was, hey, what are your updates on the noise? And that's a big topic that we'll cover tonight. I know a lot of people have been anticipating that. So when we met with the folks from the Christiana Village and presented the alternative 4 as the recommended preferred alternative, there was definitely some opposition to that, especially because, they felt that we were getting a lot closer to the town and that would kind of affect the character of the town. So I think what we heard was, hey, can you go back and try to modify any of the other alternatives? Is there something else that you can do? So from there, the team did go back and took a look at alternatives 1 through 3 again, and tried to make some modifications, which Carrie will talk about in a minute or two. And so we took a look and we came up with a new recommended preferred alternative based off of the modifications. So we went again and started the process of meeting internally with our managers, with the legislators, and then our internal environmental studies group, and then our external environmental agency group. And here we are today. So again, the big highlights of this evening's presentation are presenting the modified alternative 3 as the recommended preferred alternative and providing that update on the noise analysis that a lot of people had been asking questions on. So with that being said, I know that there was a lot of information that I just threw your way. I'm going to turn it over to Carrie now, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the modification that we had done for alternatives 1 through 3 and talk a little bit more about the design efforts again. So Carrie.
All right, thank you. So as we discussed back in November, the original alternatives were intended to maximize use of the new Newtown ramps, drawing as much traffic away from the 273 interchange as possible. However, as Brianna just described, after receiving public feedback and hearing the desire for some motorists to continue making that dogleg movement, especially in off-peak hours, we performed additional traffic modeling to see if that hard right from southbound SR1 to southbound SR7 could work. And that's what we're showing here in yellow. It does work, so we can incorporate this movement, shown with the yellow arrow again, into modified alternatives 1, 2, and 3. So please note this hard right movement is very similar to the movement required just to the south to access the Eden Square Shopping Center on US 40 from southbound SR1. So now Pat's going to take us through the revised impact comparisons of these modified alternatives.
Unmute myself. I'm just going to stop for one moment just to remind everyone that you can ask questions at any time. We're covering a lot of information on these slides. So if you have a question at any time, please type it into the Q&A, use the Q&A button, and you can type into the Q&A box and get your questions down as we're going through the presentation. So you don't have to try and remember what you were thinking about 4 or 5 slides later. So this slide here is a matrix that we use to compare all of the build alternatives, not only against one another, but also against the no build alternative, and how well each one of the alternatives measure up at meeting the purpose and need. So I won't go through every number on this slide, but there are a few things I want to highlight that show up in the results. And you can see that the travel time benefits are in the top 2 or 3 rows of the matrix. And compared to the no build alternative, if you look out to the year 2050, the travel times along SR1 and also along SR273 are predicted to get quite long if there is no improvements made to SR1. So with each one of the alternatives, they compare pretty well along SR1. Each one of the alternatives reduce the travel time somewhere between 4 and 5 minutes, depending on whether it's the AM or PM peak. As well on 273, each one of the alternatives make significant improvements to the travel time along 273. And you can kind of see highlighted in blue, the recommended preferred alternative 3 also has the added benefit of removing one of the traffic signals along 273. The bottom portion of the matrix looks at a lot of the environmental impacts that we're considering for each one of the alternatives. And you can compare how each one of those stack up against one another. You can see that alternative 3, for instance, and alternative 1 sort of carry the least amount of impact in terms of right-of-way impacts or property impacts, and also the environmental impacts as well. So again, this will be available on DelDOT's website along with the rest of the presentation after the workshop, so you can look at these numbers a little bit more closely. Okay, Carrie, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to describe, again, we've kind of hit on a lot of these things with alternative 3, but pointing out the modification to the alternative 3 and sort of why it's going to be falling out as the recommended preferred alternative. So big change, obviously, is that the southbound SR1 to southbound SR7, that dogleg movement we've talked about, is now unrestricted. So you can make that hard right that we'd shown with the yellow arrow on a previous slide. So that is now incorporated into this alternative. So from a traffic modeling standpoint, the modified alternative assumes 50% of southbound SR7 traffic. So those trying to access SR7 will use the Newtown ramp. So the ramp further south just provides that travel choice to either continue down SR1 to access 7 or still get off here like you normally would today. Again, this combines the 2 existing ramp signals on either side of SR1 into a single signal to accommodate all the ramp movements. And this does maintain the existing park and ride lot and access. Next slide, please. So again, just to reiterate, the modified alternative 3 still does include the SR1 third lane widening and the Newtown Road ramps. And what really fell out is that modified alternative 3 solves the project's critical traffic congestion issues the best by significantly improving those travel times, as Pat had mentioned on 1 and 273, maintaining full access to SR7 at the 1 and 273 interchange, and removing 1 traffic signal on 273 to most effectively address future traffic growth. Next slide, please. So what is a SPUI? So the single point urban interchange is a grade separated interchange design where all those freeway ramps begin or end at a single signalized intersection on the arterial road. In this case, the arterial road is SR 273. It's a great solution for locations with limited right-of-way and or locations with heavy left turn traffic volumes to and from the freeway ramps. Again, we definitely have that situation at this interchange. And the main benefits are improved safety, increased efficiency and capacity, and fewer traffic signals. So to help better visualize the single point urban interchange and how it works, we'll now show a short video prepared by the Missouri Department of Transportation and HNTB.
This animation shows a single-point urban interchange that links a freeway on top with a major thoroughfare or arterial street that passes underneath. The name single point refers to the fact that all through traffic on the arterial street and all traffic turning left onto or off of the interchange can be controlled from a single set of traffic signals. There are 3 traffic signal cycles. The first cycle is for through traffic on the arterial street, the traffic that is not turning. Cycle 2 is for traffic leaving the freeway and turning left onto the arterial street. Cycle 3 is for traffic leaving the arterial street and turning left onto the freeway. You've just seen how a single-point urban interchange works.
All right, so please note that Delaware does not currently have a single point urban interchange. However, they are in some surrounding states.
This animation shows a single.
Can't get enough of that video. And also note this is not the same type of interchange as the diverging diamond interchange further south at the SR-72 and SR-1 interchange. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how pedestrians and bicyclists would move through this type of an interchange. So the next three slides are entitled in the lower right, cycles 1, 2, and 3, and these correspond to what we just saw in the video on how those traffic signal is phased. So the larger arrows are showing the vehicle movements. Maybe a little tough to see, but on the outside of those larger green arrows are just two green stripes. Those are the bike lanes, which are right adjacent to the vehicle lanes. And then on that eastbound 273 side, as I mentioned earlier, the project would have proposed sidewalks from SR7 off the screen to the upper side of the screen, heading east to just on the other side of the interchange to recently constructed sidewalks near Wedgefield Drive. So these four crossings are going to be shown for pedestrian crosswalks. The outer two and the outer that are shown in yellow here, those are yield conditions in all three cycles. Not unlike other interchanges with 95 or SR1, where a ramp comes into another a road that has sidewalks. So those two are yield conditions, but the interior ones for those two ramps are going to be signalized for the pedestrians. So in this first cycle, the bikes would be going with traffic, as well as those two inner pedestrian crosswalks would get the green signal. Next slide, please. So this is cycle 2, and this is the vehicles are coming off of Route 1, heading on to 273. As you can see, the bikes will be stopped here, those two red lines, and then one of the pedestrian movements would be stopped, and the other one would still have a green head signal. And next slide. So this is that third cycle. So this is accessing SR1 from 273. And you'll also note this is when the hard right would be going from southbound SR1 to make that dog leg to southbound SR7. So that would be getting the green at this time as well. So the bicyclist would be stopped in this cycle, and then the other pedestrian movement would stop, and the one on the northbound side would get the green. Okay, so we hit all three cycles, and now we're going to turn things over to Erin for an environmental studies update.
Thanks, Carrie. DELDOT is working on an environmental assessment, or an EA, document for the project. Over the next couple slides, I'll give an update on the environmental analyses that have been occurring to support the EA. In August of this year, the Federal District Court vacated the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, which defined the waters of the U.S. The Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers have reverted back to the pre-2015 definition of waters of the U.S. based on two Supreme Court cases commonly referred to as Rapanos. In response to these new definitions, DELDOT has updated the wetlands and waters delineated features to reflect the new current guidance, as well as recalculated the impacts. Overall, this has resulted in an increase in impacts from what was presented last November in 2020. Next slide, please. Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act requires federal agencies to consider the effects to historic properties on federal actions. Under the previous 2020 project activities, which Brianna described at the beginning of the presentation, the Section 106 process was initiated for the 9-mile corridor. and also preliminary archaeological and historic architecture surveys were completed. Under the current effort, the 106 process has been reinitiated, and the area of potential effects, or APE, has been defined. This is shown in the light yellow on the map on the screen. The blue is the second project to the south around the Tybouts corner interchange. The results of the 106 consultation will be presented in the environmental assessment. Next slide. In addition to the natural, cultural, and Kevin will give an update on the noise, other resource analyses that we've been conducting include communities, parks, air quality, and hazardous materials. The map on the slide shows in pink the limits of construction in the adjacent environmental resources which have been identified and mapped. We are continuing to coordinate on the potential effects of the preferred alternative and ways to mitigate for these unavoidable impacts. The results will be presented in the environmental document. Kevin, you can give an update on the noise analysis.
Thanks, Erin. As Erin noted, noise analysis is part of the NEPA process and follows DelDOT's noise policy and federal regulations. We use a computer model developed by the federal government called the Traffic Noise Model, or TNM for short, to assess noise impacts, and then if noise impacts are identified, possible mitigation. The general process is the noise engineers coordinate with highway design engineering team to model the roadways three-dimensionally as designed, along with the topography that's outside of the roadway that's not affected by the roadway work, to assess the general noise produced by the roadway. To get some of these results, we also coordinate and facilitate with traffic engineers and to define the traffic noise that would be the loudest hour of the day, which is as required by DelDOT and Federal Highway Administration. The output of our noise modeling results is the predicted loudest hour noise level. So when the predicted hour noise level is provided from the computer models, we then look at we look to identify what we call noise impacts. And that would be step one on this slide, where a noise impact is defined by DelDOT for two conditions. One is a specific threshold. This is we've shown as 66 here on our slide. This is the threshold for residential properties, and this is 66 decibels in noise levels. The second one is it an increase over existing condition? And DelDOT defines that significant increase as a change of 12 decibels over the existing condition. If a noise impact is identified, then we move to steps 2 and 3. This is what we've been working on since our last meeting in November of last year. And we move to determine if possible noise mitigation is feasible and what we call feasible and reasonable. So step 2 is the feasibility. Feasibility is basically the combination of acoustical elements, does it reduce noise levels, and engineering factors, such as can we actually build it. Step 3 would be a reasonableness criteria, and reasonableness is the combination of social, economic, and environmental factors that need to be considered in the evaluation of a noise abatement measure. And the 3 key items associated with this is the cost of the noise barrier. Is it a significant reduction of noise defined as 9 decibels for 25% of the properties? And the third one, which we won't address in the NEPA phase, but will move forward once if barrier was recommended with community meetings and so forth, or letters to the community, which is, will the majority of residents be in favor of the mitigation provided? Next slide, please. So this slide provides a general summation of our noise analysis results. Communities were separated into common noise environments, and this is defined generally as the similar land use types that are exposed to similar noise sources and levels, and they're generally defined as between interchanges or intersections. The table provides data on noise impacts and the assessment of potential mitigation. And mitigation here is in the form of noise barriers. We were unable to provide any other, or realistically look at any other noise reduction methodologies such as berms or other items that might reduce the noise levels to the communities. The values shown for mitigation are associated with what we call an optimized option. We looked at many different barrier scenarios and what it would do and what it would cost, but the optimized is where we attempt to attain a substantial noise reduction while meeting the feasible and reasonable design goals. In some cases, you can see we combined some of the communities together. So for School Bell and Weathersfield apartments on the southbound of SR1, south of 273, we combined these because basically they're so close. When you looked at one barrier, the length of a barrier would, for one community, if we looked at the other one, would overlap. So we defined them as a single common noise environment. The other thing we did was then we took a look at the common noise environment definition. Again, generally between interchanges and receiving the same noise from the same source. Here we took a look at communities that were across the road from one another. In this case, we took a look at the Weathersfield Christiana's Meadows, and we combined that with the apartments to see what that would do. Because again, we could define them as one common noise environment. We also did this for communities up and down the corridor where they were in the same sort of scenario, but they unfortunately did not meet the reasonableness criteria. Next slide, please. The conclusion of our noise analysis is that noise mitigation in the form of noise barriers are preliminary recommended for 5 communities. They are the School Bell Apartments, the Christiana Meadow Apartments, the Christiana Meadow Subdivision, the Weathersfield Subdivision, and the Lincoln Center. I'll now turn it over to Carrie to provide a graphic of these locations.
Next slide, please. All right, so as Kevin just mentioned, there were five locations, but really there are actually 3 lengths of walls because as Kevin mentioned, they kind of run together from a noise environment standpoint. So starting, these lines are a little hard to read on this slide. There are actually these red lines that run parallel with SR1. Starting kind of heading southbound from 273 around numbers, the little yellow hexagons like number 15, is one stretch of barrier that is adjacent to the School Bell Apartments, running pretty much from the ramps, the on-ramps, heading to southbound 1. Continuing across School Bell Road, there will be a barrier actually on the bridge to make that continuous. And continuing to the south, adjacent to the Christiana Meadows Apartments. And skipping a little bit down to the left side of the slide, hexagon number 8. That is the Lincoln Center noise barrier. So that is a planned community that has, well, development that has residential components on that northern section. So that's a shorter noise barrier. And flipping over to northbound SR1, again, the one long continuous starting at, basically see the little pointer there from the yellow hexagon number 10 in that area. So that encompasses Weathersfield subdivision. And as you continue north, the Christiana Meadows subdivision, and that would be, that noise barrier would stop at School Bell Road. Next slide, please. So we talked about those yellow hexagons. Here's where they kind of come into play. So we took a look at some cross sections. Just going to show you a few sample ones here for the potential noise barrier locations. So this slide shows what a noise barrier could potentially look like. Christiana Meadows Apartments. So this is along southbound SR1. Just to give a sense of how tall a noise barrier could be to provide the mitigation required. So in the roadway, the blue is either pavement widening or reconstructed pavement. And just gives you a sense of the height of the apartments, how far they are away from the roadway, and kind of that the height of that noise barrier compared to the vehicles on the road. And next slide, please. So now we're on the other side of SR1, northbound side. This is Christiana Meadows subdivision. So this is a single family home community, and a similar thing showing the, just again, relative scale, what a noise barrier can look like. Again, the blue in the roadway is reconstructed or widened pavement. And then this shows kind of in between the noise barrier and the home, in this location, the existing vegetation or tree canopy, and would certainly want to really minimize disturbance to that canopy. So that shows that there is that separation between the noise barrier and the existing vegetation. Next slide, please. So as Kevin mentioned, not all the areas meet the feasible and reasonable noise barrier criteria. So in those areas, we are exploring visual mitigation opportunities. And those could include retaining walls with a road barrier to preserve existing slope vegetation or berms, enhancing existing berms where right-of-way allows, and also possibly adding fencing or screening where feasible. All right, so now we're going to turn things back over to, I'm sorry, I got one more. There we go. I got one more cross section to look at. So this would be a possibility to kind of illustrate that retaining wall situation. So this is Bear Crossing, kind of on the northern end of Bear Crossing. So this is adjacent to southbound SR1. So here you see again, the blue is the roadway widening or a reconstructed pavement. And there's a pretty, well-vegetated slope in between SR1, which is higher than the existing ground and the residences in this location. So the goal would be to really minimize disturbance to that visual screen that the vegetation provides. So really, by putting in a retaining wall, really hope to minimize that disturbance to that existing vegetation. All right, so now we're going to turn back to Matt and Pat to wrap things up.
All right, thank you, Carrie. Just to take you through kind of where we've been and where we're going. This is a kind of a pared down version of the slide that Brianna described earlier, just in terms of where we're at in the process. So if you look at November of 2020, we had our initial public meeting with the purpose and need and the alternatives. Following some of the feedback, there was a follow-up meeting with Christiana Village. And then following on to that, we refined and revised some of the alternatives, took those to the legislators and our environmental services office in preparation for this meeting here. So if you can see the yellow star with the public meeting with our recommended preferred alternative, that's where we're at right now. We'll take the feedback that we get tonight and hopefully be able to progress in spring of next year with our final environmental document with our preferred alternatives and the impacts that will be made available for public review. And we'll be able to finalize our NEPA process before heading into a final design. So that's a little bit of where we've been, where we're at, and where we're going. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Pat to finish out the presentation.
Thanks a lot, Matt. And thanks to the project team for really covering a lot of information in a pretty short amount of time on the project. So, and thanks for everyone for listening. We're going to start the question and answer portion of the workshop. So I'll just review a few things with you. We're going to start with the questions that we received tonight, and then we received several questions before the workshop, and we'll answer those as well. So we're going to try and answer every question that we received tonight, as well as those that we received earlier, so you get a sense of what people were asking before the workshop. After the workshop, it'll probably take a week or so. We will post on DelDOT's website frequently asked questions and then the responses to those questions. So if you ever want to go back and see what questions were asked and how they responded to, those will be posted on the SR1 project page. So to just recap real quick, if you need to or would like to ask a question, please click on the Q&A button at any time and then enter your question. So the chat function at this point in time will not work, but the Q&A function will, so you can enter your question there. And if you're not on Zoom for the meeting and you join by phone, you can email DelDOT at dotpr@delaware.gov, and you can send your question in that form, and then we'll answer your question after the workshop. So with that, I think we'll get started. I'm just going to queue up the questions that were asked this evening, and then we'll provide you with a response. So the first one came in. It's asking, is there any improvement going east on 273 from southbound Route 1 at the interchange? It now utilizes a left turn onto 273 at the light and hits another light under the bridge. So again, I guess to recap, is there an improvement when you get off of SR1 southbound to head east on 273? And I'll queue up Carrie for that question. Respond.
Kim, would you mind going back to slide 19, please? Okay, great. So exactly. So as the questioner asked, today when you get off southbound SR1, you make this left, you have to wait at a signal here. And then, yeah, if it's timed, the timing isn't great and you make the left, then you have to stop at another signal at the other ramps. So under this recommended preferred alternative, that is now all combined into one signal. So once you are in these lanes to make a left to continue eastbound on 273, you're only waiting at one signal. So those three cycles that we talked about, once you get that green light, you don't have anything to stop until you get further east on 273.
All right, thanks, Carrie. Kevin, there's a few questions related to noise, so I'll start with the first that came in from Eric. The question is, will the noise abatement include planting trees to abate the noise and also act as a visual screen? And I think that's a Kevin and Carrie question. Kevin, you want to start off?
Sure, Pat. Thanks. So basically, trees as noise abatement, it doesn't work real efficient when you're planting them. The studies have shown that you need about 100 feet deep, meaning from the roadway to your house full of trees, as well as underbrush, to completely block the path of sound. Basically, one of the rules of thumbs is if you can see through it, you can hear through it. The sound waves will make their way through it. So planning for noise abatement normally isn't done. As in terms of visual, Carrie, you want to go ahead and answer that one? I mean, we did show some slides on that, so go ahead.
Yeah, certainly we would strive to, in many of these locations, again, Route 1 has been there for quite a while. That vegetation has grown up and thick and underbrush, and certainly the goal would be to preserve as much of that as possible. So that would certainly be with those retaining walls and things that we had mentioned to really help maintain that visual screening that's already out there. And some of those locations even have berms or planted berms existing, so that would certainly be the goal, would be to maintain some of those that existing screening.
Okay, Kevin, this question's from Eric as well. Will the faces of the barriers incorporate aesthetic elements or art like other states do?
So, Pat, I'm actually going to go ahead and probably defer that to Brianna and or Matt. Generally speaking, they do have some aesthetic elements. I don't know about art. That would be a decision that would be made further on. And I don't, Brianna or Matt, I don't know if you have any input on that.
Yeah, I think right now, Kevin, you touched upon it a little bit earlier, where we are at in the process. We kind of identified the sites where these would be located, but we haven't gone too much into the actual design details just yet. So I think that would be determined a little bit later, and we would be working with the communities on what would be proposed. So stay tuned for more information on the exact design details.
Okay. The next question comes in from Joseph, and it may be worth going back to the slide that had the matrix of the noise locations.
I think that's 30.
Joseph's asking, how is Zone 10 any different than Springfield's area? How come Springfield and Rutledge aren't joined together in the noise study? Joseph is asking, have you heard the jake brakes of the trucks coming down grade from Route 40 to Tybouts Corner?
So to answer the Zone 10 question, so Zone 10 is a common noise environment far removed from, say, the Weathersfield and Christiana Meadows subdivisions. They are separated by the future Newtown ramps, which again, we were defining common noise environment as per the federal regulations and guidance manuals that explained to us how to combine communities together into a common noise environment, and they are considered different. They do experience similar noise and noise sources, but they are considered a different zone, so they wouldn't be compared. In terms of Springfield and Rutledge, Rutledge is actually not considered part of the study at the currently as we've laid it out. It will be part of the Phase 2 project when that was to get underway. Springfield's was combined. It's not shown on our map, as I mentioned earlier, but it was combined with the Bear. Springfield's and Bear Crossing were combined to take a look if that would work. Again, there are impacts in those communities, and that is true from noise, but we were not able to develop a barrier system that would meet the criteria as set forth in DELDOT's noise policy, and therefore it's not effective and not recommended for construction. In terms of jake brakes or engine brakes, that is true. Engine brakes are a problem across the country. Generally, it's difficult to include in a noise analysis. It is noises. Generally, we want to have noise that is occurring uniformly, meaning it's the everyday occurrence across the board. It's not a moment or an instant of noise. Jake brakes are annoying. I would agree with that. Generally speaking, the only thing that can normally be done for jake brakes, even a noise barrier wouldn't stop a jake brake. You'd still hear it. And it still would, it wouldn't reduce its noise levels that significantly. But generally speaking, you start talking about litigation and regulation, more than litigation, really regulation by the Delaware government to provide limitations if it can be deemed safe.
Okay. The next comment comes in from Drew. Drew is asking, when will these documents be available on the web? So Brianna, do you want to take that?
I could take that one, Pat. Yeah. So tomorrow we should have the presentation itself in a PDF format uploaded to the website. However, it's going to take us a little bit longer to get the video processed and prettied up on there. So hopefully sometime early next week for the video. So, yeah.
Thanks, Brianna.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the next question, and Brianna, I think this one will be for you as well. When is construction estimated to begin, and what's the anticipated project duration?
Yeah, so let me unmute myself. So for this one, as we mentioned earlier, we're currently in the very early stages of design for this project, actually in the project development process. So as mentioned in the presentation, the goal is to have the environmental document out for review in 2022. And that's kind of the key mile point right now that we're shooting for, because once we have that approved, the team will better be able to evaluate the design schedule moving forward, as well as how we'd like to actually phase out the project. So right now we don't have that hard construction date set. But again, the key is once that environmental document is approved, we have the ability to kind of move forward and plan that design schedule, and then also the ability to break out the project into smaller projects if funding becomes available sooner, to be able to construct. So again, I don't really have a good answer for that at the moment. Again, we're trying to reach that mile point in 2022 in spring. And then from there, we should have a better idea of how we're going to phase this and if we're going to break it up into multiple projects or not. So as we continue to update our project, we will continue to update our project website and make sure that the public is informed as additional information becomes available. So again, stay tuned for more info.
Thanks a lot, Brianna. Okay, I think we've answered all the questions that have come in tonight. We'll go back and we have 7 or 8 questions that came in before tonight's meeting. So we'll begin to address those. And I'll start out with this question here. And this is a good figure to show, or a good map to show to answer this question. The question came in from Naomi, and Naomi was asking, where is Tybouts Corner? So if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, Tybouts Corner is called out. And it's basically the interchange between SR1 and US 13, where SR1 essentially takes a bend away from, or a bend to your upper left as it merges in with US 13. So that is Tybouts Corner. Okay. Next question is for BJ. If BJ is queued up. Hey, BJ. There's concern about excess traffic congestion along Route 7 and Route 40. And I would assume that this question pertains to the inclusion of the Newtown ramps and directing traffic off of SR1 to Route 7 via the Newtown ramps. So, BJ, could you take this one?
Sure. So as we mentioned during the presentation, existing congestion on 273 between southbound SR1 ramp and 7 is in large part due to a so-called dogleg movement, in which motorists are turning right from the southbound SR1 off-ramp and then immediately turning left to southbound SR7. As a part of this project, we completed a origin and destination study through the SR1 and 273 interchange, and learned that about 80% of the motorists making a right turn from southbound SR1 ramp will then proceed to southbound SR7 in the dogleg movement. So the proposed Newtown ramps provide motorists with another route option, a more direct connection, if you will, to their destinations along SR7, while bypassing congested intersections along 273 and SR7 corridor. And as Carrie mentioned during the presentation, we assume that 50% of the motorists who would make the dogleg movement to use the proposed Newtown ramps, which is expected to decrease the traffic volume traveling through the 273 and 7 intersection, as well as the SR7 corridor between 273 and the proposed Newtown ramps.
Thanks a lot, BJ. BJ and Carrie, I'll direct this next question to you guys. What measures will be taken to abate the light pollution from the roadway lighting?
I guess I can start first. The new lighting system needed for this project will utilize the cut-off light fixtures, which focus the lighting on only the roadway and sidewalks. And the lights will also be designed to meet all of the latest uniformity requirements in DELDOT's 2020 traffic lighting policy manual. And these design elements are expected to reduce unwanted light pollution and Lastly, for this project, we're not planning on using any high mast lighting. These are the really tall lights found on I-95 between 273 and 896, which have the greatest potential of increasing light pollution.
Thanks, BJ. Okay, Kevin, I've got another noise question that came in prior to the meeting. So what is the state law regarding sound levels for SR1? And when was the latest testing completed and where were the sensors placed?
So the state has developed a noise policy. The Delaware Department of Noise Transportation has developed a noise policy that is in compliance with federal regulations. So I don't know if there is actually a state law regarding sound levels. There are some policies and there are some laws in the books, but it doesn't have to necessarily do with how we do a noise analysis. For that, we follow the federal regulation, and DelDOT is required to develop a noise policy, which they have done and which is actually on their website as well. In terms of ambient noise measurements, we did take measurements in the field. We took them in 3 different times. We took about 18 of them. They were done in February, March, and then in June of 2020. They were 30 minutes in a piece. At the same time, we took traffic counts. So basically, I want those who are still on the call with us to know that noise measurements are really only used as a snapshot in time. They aren't there to define the noise environment in essence. What we are looking to do is to develop what we call the worst hour condition of the day, which is as required by DelDOT's policy and federal regulations. So noise measurements are really used to assess our model, meaning we take measurements, we take traffic counts, we model the conditions that are present for the existing roadway and the topography between the roadways. And then we put that information all into the computer model that we talked about earlier, the TNM model, and we observe the results. When the model output and the ambient measurements are in conformance, we call that a validated model. And from there, we start building what we call the worst noise hour. Again, we are looking at the traffic condition that represents the loudest single hour of the day. And we work with our traffic engineers to define the mix and speeds of traffic that are going to develop, that are going to generate those numbers. So again, we did take measurements. We used it for noise validation. We took it at 18 different spots throughout the corridor. They're generally in the backyards and abutting SR1 is where they were. Some of them are removed for in what we call second row. This is where we want to look at what the row of homes or what buildings, what topography does as we move farther away from the roadway itself. All that's incorporated into our model, and noise measurements help us to develop the model better so that we can predict those kind of those items.
Thanks, Kevin. And another question that came in from Robert before the meeting, and this graphic that's up on the screen will be helpful. Will there be noise reduction barriers for the homes that back up to Sugarberry Drive in Rutledge? And Sugarberry, as you can see, is just beyond the limits of the current project.
So I think as we mentioned in the earlier in the questions and answers, Rutledge itself is not considered part of this study area. As we can see, it stops just short. But as Brianna mentioned, and I think Aaron as well, there's a proposed future improvements to Tybouts. We don't have a schedule on that yet, but that is something that's coming down as DelDOT moves forward with improvements to SR1 and improving traffic flow. And it will be included in those studies.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay. All right. I'm just scanning through our questions from tonight to see if we had any additional questions come in. Don't think we had any. Just make sure. And I think we've answered. No, we do have one other question that came in prior to the meeting. I believe this might be a little bit beyond the project limits, but Brianna, hopefully you'll be able to address this question. I believe, based on the address of the individual that posed the question, I think this is east of SR1 on 273. And they're asking about a bus stop in front of their driveway when they're turning into the driveway. And I think this might be down toward Appleby Road.
Yeah, so Pat, thank you for that. I think with that was a separate project. There was a project in construction on SR 273 from Appleby Road to Airport Road. And I think that is what the person is actually referring to. So it is separate from what we've been discussing here today. If you do have any specific questions or concerns about that and related to the project that's been in construction, you can feel free to reach out. The same similar methods that we had talked about earlier. You can email the DOT public@delaware.gov, and that information again is included in here. I don't think there was a specific comment or concern other than just noting that there was a bus stop kind of by their driveway. So if that person has any concerns about that other project, please feel free to reach out to our public relations group.
Thanks, Brianna. And we do have some information on where the question came in, so we'll probably give some feedback after the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm just checking again, and please, somebody, if you from our project team, if you see a question that I haven't picked up on, let me know. But I think we have answered everyone. So with that, I think we'll wrap up for tonight. We want to thank everybody for attending and for asking your questions and participating. There are several ways you can comment. I just want to go over those again. Just to, Kim, if you can go to the next slide. It's a summary of ways to comment. Thanks. There's several ways you can comment on DelDOT's webpage, and it's the SR1 corridor page. You can send comments in and continue to send them in through email at dotpublic@delaware.gov, or you can send them in by mail to DelDOT Community Relations, P.O. Box 778, Dover, Delaware. And DelDOT has a comment period for the project that's open until November 26th, so about a month from now, a little over a month from now. You can send in your comments until that time, and we'll address those comments as they do come in. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Matt to wrap us up, and I'd like to thank everyone again for attending tonight and listening to our presentation. And I hope you all have a nice holiday season. Matt?
Thanks, Pat. Yeah, I'll just reiterate our thanks for everyone coming out. Like I said before, your input is invaluable to our project development process. So we really appreciate everyone taking the time to come out here tonight and give their feedback. So with that, I think we can close out the presentation. Thank you again, and have a good evening.